Hello world. Today we have a special interview with McCraken Poston, author of the book Zenith Man, Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom. His new book is a true crime tale featured on forensic files, American justice, and people, set in a small southern town where the truth lay buried for decades. His book is now available online at McCrakenPostonJr.com and other online stores. Now let's join the conversation.
Hello world, this is Talkin Live, and we have a special guest here, McCraken Poston. Okay, here we are back again at Talkin Live. We have this special guest here, an attorney, and he's handled some of the top cases in 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐥 County, and I know he spreads out and goes to other places. He's maybe you might call him a high-profile attorney. He does all these high-profile cases, and he usually wins too. So
not always.
Well, we can't win them all, but here he is, and he's going to talk about his book. And as he talks about the book, and then we'll get back in, and I'll ask him some questions, and we'll find out what made him decide to write this book. Go ahead, Mr. Poston.
Lamar,
you got the floor.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I'm from here in 𝐒𝐡𝐚𝐥 County, born and raised, and a long time ago, Ringgold was a different place than it is now. It was a lot smaller. There were a lot of interesting characters in town, like in most southern towns. You had some people that were quite eccentric. Yeah. And so this book examines one of those characters, somebody that I had the honor of representing when everything went wrong in his world, and it was pretty close to the heels of everything I thought going wrong in my world. And so the book's called Zenith Man, Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom. I've been trying to write it for 25 years. I would give the story away to anybody that would listen. It's been on Forensic Files. A lot of your viewers who like Forensic Files will remember it from Season 5, Episode 9, an episode they called Calligraphy. It was kind of a play on the word kill and calligraphy, and I'll explain that connection later. It's also been on American Justice with Bill Curtis. It's been featured on NPR's Snap Judgment. It's been in the People magazine back in 1999, front page of the Washington Post. But none of these stories could explain my client, Alvin Ridley. That's he and his young wife just before they married at a Lake Winnipesaukee, and that's an amusement park, as you know, in our area, but everybody else doesn't know that, in the photo booth. So there was a strip of 4 photos.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah.
I used to get my picture taken with my wife in there.
Yeah, there was a strip.
Broke the camera.
Well, Ringgold is famous for the main thing we're famous for in the modern era. You know, we're famous for Civil War battles, but we're famous in the modern era as the place where Dolly Parton and Carl Dean got married. They got their license at the courthouse, and they went across the street to the Baptist church. Well, 3 weeks later, Alvin and Ridley and Virginia Hickey get their marriage license. Now, by the time George Jones and Tammy Wynette got married here in 1969, Virginia had disappeared.
Yeah.
Her family, understandably, I don't blame them, was looking for her. Her parents, and again, I understand them. I understand the motivation. They put articles in the newspaper. Our married daughter is missing, last seen with her husband, Alvin Ridley. What we didn't know was that there was a backstory, a conflict between Virginia and her family. They lived in the new housing, public housing in Ringgold. They had a 2-bedroom apartment. At some point, they got evicted. And Alvin, being Alvin, he's very litigious and hard to agree with a lot of things. He fights it. And they have a jury trial over the eviction. Well, because I later represented Alvin, who was accused of murdering his wife, I was in the position to try to learn as much as I could. He wanted me to relitigate all this old litigation, including the eviction, including where he sued over what seemed to be a minor traffic accident that his father had. His dad died 2 years later of pancreatic cancer, but in Alvin's mind, there was a connection. And he had litigation that was always falling short of anything that he wanted it to be. It was always ended up being dismissed for one reason or another. Well, one of those litigations resulted in a counterclaim against him, and his Chevy van was seized, and that was in 1984. Well, to Alvin Ridley, that was the epitome of insult, and that was the high point of his conspiracy theories against the local government. And so he shut his business down, shuttered the Zenith dealership, and ran for sheriff of Catoosa County. Now, he ran against the popular sheriff, J.D. Stewart.
My brother-in-law's uncle.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
So J.D., was very good politically. He had been beat back in the 70s, and he stayed out a couple of terms, but then he came back. And or maybe it was the 60s, maybe 68 he got beat. And he came back in 76. That's the way it was. Well, when he came back, Alvin Ridley he was given by J.D. Stewart one of these honorary deputy cards that sheriffs used to hand out like candy.
Yeah.
Because it helped you sometimes if you got a speeding ticket out of town.
Yeah.
And so Alvin used that honorary deputy card, and when he got mad at the county for picking up his van, he ran against J.D., citing his 8 years of law enforcement experience using the honorary deputy card that J.D. had given him.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a comedy of errors, but I remember I was already interested in politics then, and I remember Alvin Ridley speaking to a crowd in 1984 on the courthouse lawn, an all-candidates rally, and I was already interested in running for office. I was 4 years away from running myself.
Was Alvin Ridley akin to the Ridleys in Chatsworth, Georgia?
Yes. Yeah.
I know those.
Yeah,
people.
from the Ridley community out there.
E.D. and all them. I know who you're talking about.
His dad was Bill Ridley, but his dad had brothers that were over here, like 𝐒𝐿 Ridley and others. And Alvin was, as he mounted the courthouse steps to give his talk as a sheriff candidate, I could tell that the crowd was ready for him in terms of heckling and jeering him and giving him a hard time. But that's when I realized that Alvin Ridley is smarter than anybody thinks he is. He brought a cassette recorder. He brought it to the microphone. He pushed the button, and you could hear the end of a sentence that Luther Massengale was saying.
Yeah, I know Luther too.
About the sign-off of Channel 12 TV. You remember how, unlike in this world we have today, now TV stations used to sign off about midnight or 1 a.m. And they played the national anthem.
Yeah.
And Alvin had taped the playing of the national anthem, put it right in the microphone, and played it for this crowd. Well, he completely reset that crowd because suddenly everybody had to stand up and take off their hats and show respect for the country. And I thought, this guy's smarter than everybody gives him credit for, because he completely just disarmed the people that were there to make fun of him and to tease him. And then he went on into his speech later, and it was kind of a rambling thing about the sheriff taking his van and his daddy's car wreck not being processed right, and the very ills that he constantly complained about. So obviously he did not win. But and then I got elected to the Georgia legislature and was there for 4 terms, and developed diabetes while I was there, so I kind of changed my perspective. I kind of became a reformer. I then decided I needed to either get out of politics or go full time in it, so I ran for U.S. Congress against our incumbent Nathan Deal.
Yeah.
He smacked me pretty badly.
Yeah. I remember him.
I was defeated soundly. I would never contest that election because I'm afraid I'd be beat worse if they counted it again. So, so at any event, I found myself back in the position of being at home and trying to revive a law practice that I had long ignored. On February 4th, 1997, Alvin Ridley himself drove right by an ambulance at the fire station and went to a payphone. It didn't work. He went to another payphone, which was right next on Lafayette Street, right next to the 911 center. He called in and said, first he called Erlanger Hospital asking for help, and they said, no, you've got to call your local 911. Well, Alvin's years of conspiracies, thoughts, and thinking that the Catoosa County government was against him, they just made him struggle to make that call. But he made it, and said that his wife had epilepsy and she was not breathing. And by the time they got out there, everybody was shocked to know that he even had a wife. Now, granted, everybody knew back in the 60s that he did, but she effectively disappeared by 1968. She is known to have made one appearance, and that was September 15, 1970, in the eviction trial.
Yeah.
And thanks to Alvin making me research all that stuff, I found a jury list in that file. And I reached out to a woman whose name I recognized on it, and she described to me that it was just kind of a crazy trial, that Alvin was throwing the kitchen sink into it. And then finally, Judge Paul Painter said, just stop. Mr. Ridley, I want your wife here. And he sent Alvin's father to go fetch Virginia. Virginia's parents were in the room. So we all know that part of this eviction was just trying to flush Virginia out. Judge Painter went back into his chambers with Alvin's father, Alvin's wife, and her parents, and did not let Alvin even go back there. Whatever was said in that chambers, the trial ended, and Virginia went home with Alvin and his father. What Alvin says was that Virginia told the judge and her parents, I believe that when I married, I became one with my husband. Y'all are trying to separate me and take me away from him, and I don't appreciate it. Ultimately, her parents kind of got it then, and they stopped the articles. They still made efforts to see her, and that's where Alvin developed a bad reputation of obsessing over it and of throwing them off the trail, saying, oh, she doesn't live here anymore. And anybody who would ask him, he and Virginia thought that's Virginia's family trying to flush her out again.
Yeah.
So he created a problem for himself then 27 years later when she died, because her siblings, who were now adults, understandably, were suspicious about what happened to their sister and why she never talked to them again. And unfortunately, in a small town, these rumors, they start growing, and then they snowball. And before you know it, this body went to the crime lab in Atlanta with information that this woman has been held in her basement against her will for 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And the state pathologist, seeing the tiny broken blood vessels around her eyes and her mouth called petechia or petechial hemorrhaging, it was all too easy to say, well, she must have been asphyxiated. Now, Virginia had epilepsy.
Yeah.
Since childhood. She was severely affected with it. And my suspicion all along was that she died from that epilepsy. And so we found an expert, the preeminent expert in death from epilepsy, a man named Braxton Bryant Wanamaker, a doctor out of Orangeburg, South Carolina. When he came to testify, he was going to testify that people who have seizures can have these marks. Even people who have coughing fits, depending on their constitution, they can have these spots.
Yeah.
Well, Alvin wouldn't let me in his house. For over a year, he let every police officer that ever wanted to go in, but he wouldn't let me. So Thanksgiving of 1998, my parents sent a turkey plate from Thanksgiving and said, take this to Mr. Ridley. It was that act of kindness that opened the door to his house, where I found hundreds and then later thousands of Virginia Ridley's writings. Now, our epilepsy doctor said the night before he took the stand, is there anything else unusual about this woman? And I said, she never had a thought without writing it down. And he immediately said, that's hypergraphia. Some people with epilepsy, certain types of epilepsy, have that. It compels them to write. So now I had a reason why there were so many writings. The content of the writings were day-to-day life. She loved television. She loved the actor, director, and producer Ron Howard. Well, when you think about it, he was always in real wholesome shows. Andy Griffith, Happy Days.
Yeah.
She also loved the Waltons on CBS, so she kind of monitored her own television intake. But back then it was mostly through the air channels, and the FCC did a lot of that monitoring for us. But she loved her husband. She loved cooking. She had a almost daily journal of what they were having to eat. And Alvin did not want me to have it because he said, that's all I've got left of her. So I had to make a compromise with him, another compromise. And ultimately, he agreed to bring the evidence to court, but he would keep it. Unfortunately, he also brought every day scores of cockroaches with him. It infested the small courtroom in the 1982 annex behind the old courthouse, to the point where Judge Van Pelt said, we're moving this trial to the old courthouse, to the large courtroom. Well, Lamar, when we did that, we were reuniting Virginia's writings with the last place she had ever been seen in public, September 15, 1970. And it was eerie. It was chilling. I don't necessarily follow ghost stories, but I felt very, that it was a very special combination of things.
She just didn't like to be in public, or...
Well, and one of her writings was so critical that it discussed the problems they were having with her family. It discussed that she did not like to go out of the house. And it discussed her having a conversation with Sheriff Leroy Brown.
Yeah.
So that in and of itself was such a vital document. Thankfully, her sister, who has since passed, who was a state witness, she identified her own she identified Virginia's handwriting for us, keeping me from having to get my handwriting analyst to come up and give his expert opinion on it. But it was a very difficult trial. Alvin was an extremely difficult client. We won the trial. We did all these TV shows and podcasts and radio shows, and only 3 years ago did I find out that Alvin has autism.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like getting slapped in the face with realization, this is why, to me, he was difficult.
Yeah.
He was having problems processing me in the way I ask him questions, just like he did when the law enforcement was asking him questions.
Yeah, and all these writings of her, it's in this book, right?
Yes, there's some actual images of her writing.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds like a movie to me.
It's a fascinating story. And let me just tell you, Lamar, there are no bad guys in this. Everybody was just doing their job. I concede that there was a lot of suspicion about Alvin Ridley, and he didn't help himself. But now I look back and realize these were autism traits that made him suspicious of people. Virginia seemed to be his brain trust for his legal maneuverings. I found a glossary that she wrote out for him explaining what different things mean and what different legal phrases mean. But Alvin is a very interesting guy. He was an ace at old picture tube TV repair, but the technology changed.
Yeah.
Solid state circuitry came along and
Yeah.
stuff that gives you all of this wonderful equipment in here. Alvin could not really keep up with that. He wasn't trained in that, and he laments now that people just throw their big screens away now instead of calling for a repairman to come and fix them.
Yeah, well, I'm in the recycling,
Yeah.
so I know where all that goes. Yeah.
That's right. You actually take them apart and...
No, I'd send them to the Chinese.
Oh, okay. Well, they take them apart.
Well, South Koreans, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but it takes, I've seen, did he have a shop down in Rossville?
No, in Ringgold, downtown
yeah.
Ringgold. It's where Caffeine Addicts, the coffee shop, is now.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, some of Virginia's writings are on the wall in there for people to see. And I'm hoping that this book generates a little true crime tourism for Ringgold. That is a thing.
I have a group of people coming up that produce a lot of movies. We done a show with them. We're running their trailers. Their movies go in the studio. They go into theater. They're going to go into theaters. It's a kind of a love story.
That's fantastic.
Anyway, they're supposed to come up. They'd be interested in that. But
maybe so. I don't know. It was a very personal book for me to write.
Mm-hmm.
I discussed some things that I was going through at the time, including my father's struggle with alcoholism. Wonderful man, very kind, really had a lot to do with me representing Alvin Ridley, because he and Alvin traded together.
Yeah.
My dad had some old grinders, and he would sharpen people's lawnmower blades for them, and he did that for Alvin. And
I appreciate you being here. We're looking forward to help you out on your book. It's a great book to me. That's going to be a great book. If that can't turn into a movie, nothing can.
Well,
if I had to cruise and stuff, I know how to get, and Lloyd Kaufman, but oh man, he might eat that up. I can talk to him about it.
It's getting really good sales. It's already gone into second printing with the publisher, and they even upped the number of the second printing. So it's doing well, and I think it's because I wasn't trying to settle any scores with the book. It's a human story about humans.
It's just part of life.
Yeah.
what happens in some people's life. That's what it is all about.
But I'm hoping that there's 5.5 million adults with autism still undiagnosed.
Yeah.
And so I hope that, because we've gotten quite good at catching it with children and identifying it and giving them the special services they need.
Yeah.
But still, as this 5 million people, group of people ages, there's going to be encounters with law enforcement. There's going to be encounters with courts.
Yeah.
And, if a person's not really able to process what you're saying, that could get people upset about not being, they wouldn't feel like they're being respected or heard by that person. In reality, we're all having problems processing each other. And, but a person with autism is quite often very literal. Alvin took the stand. He was doing so well that I completely forgot how literal he is. And so I said, Alvin, tell the jury what you've lost. And I was hoping he would say, my best friend or the love of my life. He said, oh, I guess the funeral bill. And the DA went to town on that because he sounded so cold and detached.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's how he processed that question. As a very literal one. What are you out? What have you lost? Technically, literally, what have you lost? Well, I guess the funeral bill. That's a perfectly good answer.
Yeah.
But of course, I was horrified when I heard it come out of his mouth. Well, thank you for having me, and I really.
And I think this is a great show. I think we both. Well, I think you explained your book, and I think people are going to love it.
I hope so.
And we're going to make sure all we can to make sure they find out about it. So
thank you.
But anyway, we appreciate all of you who's tuned in, and I hope you're going to enjoy this show. I'd like for all of you to be sure and go to Mr. Poston's website, and we'd like for you also to go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, and go to all the other Roku and all the other Amazon, where we have our old time movies and Hollywood and all that. We got a lot of other guests lined up, and so you just stay tuned to Talkin Live, and may God bless you.
Thanks for joining us today. To watch this show again, be sure to visit talkinlive.com. We now have rows on Fire TV channels for you to watch from your home TV. Or find more of our recent shows on most any of your favorite social media platforms. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Good night, world. We will be talking live with you next time. The views and opinions expressed on all Talkin Live presentations are those of the host and their guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of the Talkin Live TV broadcast studio, or by this channel or its management.